And we are live. Professor Desiraju, welcome back to the Abhijit Chavda podcast. Deekhit, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you. It's good to see you both.
The two co-authors together.
Yeah, fantastic to have you both here. So, we're going to discuss delimitation. We're going to discuss reservations as well. Let us begin with reservations. And what is the connection between the two, sir? Can you please explain that? Let's begin with that.
Well, reservations is something that the idea that certain groups in society are socially backward and that they need special care by the state. By state, I mean the government, the sovereign entity, Republic of India. The state needs to make special provisions for these people so that their level of social backwardness is raised, so that then they are able to take their place as truly equal
Mhm.
among our deeply divided society as it existed in the earlier part of the 19th century and so on. So the origin of this actually comes with the Pune Pact of Gandhi and Ambedkar,
Mhm.
from which point of time the group of people which we today loosely call scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, their interests would be preserved forever in any attempt at writing a constitution for this country. Of course, 31 was full 16 years before we even there was transfer of power.
Mhm.
But there were reasonable people, including Gandhi, who said that removing this discrimination of disadvantaged communities took priority even over independence.
Okay.
They said that this was an event that had to be done whether or not we were free of the British. There was very clear understanding, even by the late 1920s, that this must happen. And gradually it progressed to the point when our constitution was written, certain safeguards were put for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes communities. And in what is now known as certain enabling provisions of Article 15.
Mhm.
And originally, when these special privileges were given to certain communities, it was felt that in about 10 years' time, with this special treatment, the need for this special provision would go away. And all the writers of the Constitution, including Dr. Ambedkar, felt that this should last no longer than 10 years.
Okay.
At the same time, we all know that every 10 years it kept getting routinely extended by Parliament. Now, why they kept extending it is still not clear. And gradually, with the passage of time, the original purpose of these reservations, namely to lift certain communities to a level of social standing that others had enjoyed, that got gradually replaced almost unconsciously, I would say, in the identification of these groups as electoral groups, vote banks,
Mhm.
so that if certain advantages were conferred to them, mostly in the matter of admission to government education institutions and jobs and promotions, these privileges that were given to the communities allowed the crystallization of these vote banks. So far from being a tool of social upliftment, they became islands of special interest groups. And it was serving the interest of the politicians that the political class then came in a major way, trying to preserve these vote banks.
Mhm.
For the sake of quoting a number, the percentage of reservations was put at about 22.5%, which the co-author will be able to clarify. I think it was 14.5 plus 7 or something. Scheduled caste was, I think, 14, or scheduled tribe was 7.5 or something. Total 22.5 was the reservations fixed.
Okay.
And
When
this
was
kept
this?
going. Huh? Excuse
When
me?
was it? When was it kept at 21.5?
21.5 or 22.5. I think it was fixed at the beginning, at the time of the constitution itself.
Okay, that time. All right.
At that time it was. I think it was roughly proportional to the population of these groups.
Okay.
Those who were declared as scheduled caste, which incidentally Gandhi proposed the name for them Harijan, which was actually rejected by them. And later it got morphed into a word called Dalit. So, what I mean technically is what are called constitutionally scheduled caste. Scheduled
Okay.
tribe was 7, I think. So okay, it's about 22%.
Hmm.
And I think most people, by that I mean all the non-scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people, I think there was a general appreciation that this group was seriously undermined socially. I
Okay.
don't think there was much disagreement on that count. I think the problem that really happened was, I think things were going on merrily in this way, and probably, I mean, if nothing had happened, these groups would have come up naturally because they were enjoying certain benefits and they were coming up in the social ladder. It's a matter of debate whether X feels that these reservations were helping or why it was not helping. I don't think these reservations were hurting us till that point. Now, what is
Okay.
that point? The point where the pitch really became queer, Abhijit, is this Mandal Commission report,
Uh-huh.
where a vast section of the people who are now informally known as other backward castes, OBC,
Uh-huh.
thanks to the efforts of VP Singh and Devi Lal and the Mandal Commission report, which was actually dating from the 1970s but never looked at seriously.
Hmm.
When suddenly, all of a sudden, these OBCs who came amounted to 27% were suddenly brought into this scheme of reservations.
Hmm.
So that then with the SC/ST plus OBC, we touched almost a figure of 49.5% or something, half the population. And connection with the delimitation also is that there's another issue which is predominantly from the South Indian states,
Okay.
that there was something called backward class as opposed to backward caste.
Okay.
This caste is a sort of a British import
Yeah.
from the
Hmm.
Portuguese word casta. It never really
Yes.
existed in our Varna Jati scheme.
Yes.
And what happened at that stage was that thanks to a judgment which is now known as Indrasani judgment, this backward class of South India became equated to backward caste of North India. So the whole thing kind of conflated. I think my co-author may, he's a lawyer, he may explain technically this Indrasani judgment. So then what happened was that all these people roughly came in this category of OBC. The further refinement that in southern states, especially Tamil Nadu, there is some, the lowest of the OBCs became known as the most backward classes, MBC.
Okay.
So they too were entitled to reservations. And I think in a very retrograde development, the then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha, she successfully argued that the reservations in Tamil Nadu, when you add up all these reservations, go up to about 69%. So 69% of the population were coming under some sort of reservation or the other in Tamil Nadu. And ironically, at the time of the debates itself, out of sheer rhetoric, Ambedkar had said that this whole business of reservations flies in the face of equal opportunity for all.
Okay.
And so he says that for the temporary we have to live with this reservation, so that at that point of time he said everybody can get equal opportunity, which was the original intent of the constitution itself.
Mhm.
That all citizens shall be treated equally by the state, because with the reservation everybody is not being treated equally by the state, which is why, contrary to public opinion today by our today's politicians, reservations are not given to us as a fundamental right. It's not there. It is only an enabling provision which
Mhm.
will help us to achieve certain things in the fundamental rights much easier and much faster. It is not a constitutional right of anybody. And I think viewers of the podcast should be made very clear about this, because Mr. Paswan, yesterday, the minister, has said that this is a constitutional right. He is wrong. He cannot say that. It is not correct. And anybody who argues, including BJP politicians, that this is a constitutional right, or that this is something called Baba Saheb ka Samvidhan, this is all misspeaking the truth. We have to be guided by the four corners of the constitution as they stand today. And within the four corners as they stand today, this is nobody's fundamental right. It is our fundamental right to be treated as equal citizens by the state. That is our fundamental right, whatever category you may belong to. And viewers of the podcast should also be aware of Varna Jati, which is 5,000 years old, and Jati being based on profession, and Varna not being based on birth. This is the other thing. Uh, it's again a total misconception that Varna is inherited by birth. It's not. And I think people should be made aware of these terms and the fact that they mean utterly different things. Varna, Jati, caste, class.
Can you please
So,
explain these four concepts in a little detail so that new first time viewers can understand?
okay, let my co-author take over now and
Please do
explain
that.
the four
Yes.
things. Deekhit, why don't you say something?
Roughly speaking, what had happened at the time was when colonialism came and started to remake our institutions in a manner which was both understandable and administratable by the colonial authorities. They were eager to find analogues in their own cultural annals, in their own historical annals. And hence, the idea of a birth based, ossified, inflexible category of people that inherit not just their vocation but their standing in society in a fixed hierarchy. That concept of casta, as the Portuguese called it, was imported here. Viewers should know that this concept of caste has existed in analogues across not just Europe but even parts of Asia, such as Japan. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at a lot of these common English surnames like Smith, Walker, these are all shibboleths left behind from that era when your whole identity and your standing in the society was dependent upon what kind of uh, ancestral extraction you're coming from. And this was necessary primarily because in the feudal age, uh, a strict hierarchy where the aristocracy had a hierarchy of its own and then it translated that hierarchy onto the citizens or subjects rather at that time. That concept was an administrative necessity for feudal Europe. India, however, even today, if we take a look, the same surname can denote a different jati and sometimes even a different varna just a few kilometers across. There is ample evidence of flexibility within varnas of specific jatis, and there's also ample evidence of how jati formation, amalgamation, and shifting alliances, all of that happens. One should also remember that at the time when economic progress in India was taking and the specialization of vocations and the specializations of professions was taking place, we had categories of economic bodies called shrenis, which would roughly correspond to what we would today call corporations. These shrenis, which were fundamentally jatis that had organized together to pool capital resources and have a common economic life with a set of rules, a constitution of their own, if one may call it that. These Shrenis, regardless of how you would consider these professions to today fall in the caste system, were incredibly powerful vis-a-vis the king. So much so that in a few Dharmashastras it is said that the king does not even have the right to interfere in the proceedings of the Shrenis. So these are not people who were placed in a strict social hierarchy and were looked down upon, or who were denied the basics of life. Because if that was the case, you would not have these elaborate rules where the Shrenis are saying that who can be appointed representative, foreign missions can be taken up by them. They had funded temples of their own which acted as communal spaces for interaction and networking. They had rules regarding other Shrenis and their dealings with the king. So much so that there were even certain decisions that the king was not allowed to take without taking into account the opinion of the Shrenis. So now this concept of Varna, which began in the Vedic era, that someone who has taken physical birth here carries samskaras from the previous life, and he will be good at some things, he will be not so good at some things. He will have a natural knack for something. That natural knack ought to be inculcated. And there's sufficient textual evidence also from the Vedic Khilanis and commentaries thereon that there was sufficient flexibility even within a single family unit. Where within a single family unit, there could be a possibility that two children born from the same set of parents could belong to different varnas. The Jati specialization was an economic adaptation of the same as specialization of tasks began. You had weavers specializing into doing weaving, you had leather workers specializing into leather work. So much so that even within the priestly class, what today, there's a blanket caste identificator of Brahmin. You had 20 plus specific identifications regarding of who does what, who specializes in what. So, for example, priests which specialized in death rituals, they also did not intermarry with other Brahmins, and there was a degree of untouchability practiced between the two sets of Brahmins. So this is not something purely vertical, that there is someone on the top, there's someone on the bottom, and this behavior is coming because someone is on the top and someone is on the bottom. That is not the case. So Varna Jati existed in this format, and even today, the fact that multiple Jatis scattered across the land can belong to different Varnas are an indication of how this flexibility suddenly got ossified when the British began to write this in the hard letter of the law. That is when the caste system, as we understand, took root. And let us be very clear about it. If you take a look at some of the most blatant acts of social re-engineering in India via caste that happened during the British era, for example, the Criminal Tribes Act. If I take a look
Precisely.
at many of these jatis which are spread across parts of North and South India, these were fundamentally jatis that had a relationship with either the forest, the open fields, and were semi-nomadic. However, the British could not tax them because they were semi-nomadic. The British system of taxation depended upon revenue, what we today call revenue, and that revenue was tied to land. You can take a look, you can probably understand how it goes back to the feudal architecture of the European states.
Precisely. Once again,
Feudalism,
indeed.
correct. Feudalism and serfdom ties subjects to a piece of land which is then subject to taxation. Now, to tie these people into land, various different factors, various different stories were spun, including this idea of caste. And the British took the very convenient excuse that we are simply adhering to native practices, when in fact, the idea that you bind these people to a piece of specific land and you force them to only do certain vocations was completely absent. And hence, a lot of these criminal tribes, which have a bad name today or had a worse name back then, they were forced into this vocation, into this constant pressure of being opposed to society at large, because the British tied them to a piece of land and they forbade them from engaging in certain kinds of vocations. They forbade them having education. While
These
if
were
I take
called
a look at
these
the,
were called notified villages.
yeah, after independence, when there was a major program of trying to get rid of this system. First, they got rid of it, and then they figured they did not have an alternative on how to go about this thing. So they brought back a very diluted law, but it further entrenched that institutionalization of an alien system that is dividing Indians. So this over, and even today, if you take a look at the state of how the state of affairs, such people, including people who were beyond what one would today call the caste system, the Vratyas, have found their place in the Vedas, and there are specific mechanisms to bring them and integrate them into the society. So our faith and our social system was fundamentally that of integration of different ways of life. But the Indian state, which has inherited it from the British Indian state, views it more through a lens of feudalism and serfdom, a view that has been imported from Europe's historical architecture, and artificially imposes that on India, which leads to the formation of distinct identities that squabble with each other. This was very useful to the British.
Well, it is also
Which is why-
useful to the politicians. It is useful for
Nothing
the
has changed.
politicians to have different groups squabbling with each other.
100%.
So what changed
in-
after 47 is the question.
I will take just 30 seconds more, sir.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
After 1857, if you read the correspondence between the local governors, the Governor General, and the then India office, you will see that specific castes were identified as troublemakers, and they were vastly subjected to their land being taken away, genocides in local places, and so on and so forth. And because of the social engineering, because the land was taken away from one group of people and given to another group of people, you entrenched generational divides where these two people are permanently locked in political competition, and the British knew what they were doing. The same system continues.
I'll tell you what, this began with the Turkic occupation of India with the zamindari system, where zamindars would actually own the land, and they would exploit the people whose land it actually was. And this practice of the criminal tribes, notifying certain groups as criminal tribes, that had the effect of, if other population groups interacted with them, then they would also be victimized by the British. So that's why it became necessary for people, for their own protection, to shun these people notified as criminal tribes. And now that is now being portrayed as Indians discriminating against Indians, right? And those attitudes have persisted over time. But the question I would like to ask is, what does class have to do with this? Dr. Desiraju, you said that in the southern parts of India, there's also class that's come in, and class also is somehow related to this. So what's the difference between caste and class?
See, in the South, the question of class. I mean, class is a word that has a meaning in all societies at all times. If a person is said to have class, it is associated with a certain value system more than, like, let's take an example of Britain. People of a certain class enjoy watching a game of cricket.
Mhm.
People of a slightly different class enjoy watching football. Now, I can't identify this in concrete terms, but that's what it's all about. And every society, stable society, must have a class system, especially in populated countries. Densely populated countries have always gone in for some sort of an informal classification into classes. Otherwise, if all people were truly equal in all ways, it would lead to nothing short of anarchy. Which is why even the word equality, as given through the Enlightenment, it's not really equality. I mean, today, let's go to the United States of America. The biggest class distinction there is between the rich and the poor. You cannot say that it doesn't exist. And so class is something that was there in South India, and here To add to what my co-author has said, there was, and this has added to the confusion, if I may say so. There is one group of people in our country where the Varna, the Jati, and the caste are all completely congruent. And that is the subsection of the Brahmins who are responsible for the ritualistic aspects of transmitting the Vedas,
Okay.
a tradition that exists even today. And you see, not all Brahmins were entrusted with this task of recitation of the Vedas. Only a subsection of the Brahmins were given this task, and they correspond to the people who carry out worship in our temples. It is for this small group of people where, whether you call them Varna, birth based, or Jati, profession based, or caste as defined by the British, it is largely congruent. And I think this particular thing, which is also signifies the great importance of accurate recitation of the Vedas. It is basically fundamental to the existence of Bharat as a civilizational state. And this
Yes.
is something that politicians and others should be well aware of. And loosely using words like Brahminical patriarchy, etc., I think it only shows their foolishness. Because if you remove this, then you remove the whole country itself. There is nothing left. Because we will be no different from some other large country which is based on modernistic, so-called modernistic principles. So, and this is the link between reservations and delimitation today. We referred to this earlier in the program.
Yes.
The thing is that using the examples given by my co-author, the possession of land became paramount to any kind of acceptance or rise in the social hierarchy. Ownership of land, dhara. Without land, there cannot be a civilization. You cannot run Sanatani civilization in Ottawa or Auckland or London. It only makes sense within this piece of land which we call Bharatavarsha, which would, in my opinion, lie in the geographical region between Kandahar and Bali, between Sri Lanka and the Pamir Mountains, including parts of Tibet and today's China and all that. So this is the domain. This is our domain, our extended land domain. So within this land domain, you can organize Sanatana Dharma, which is what is happening today, even today, in an approximate way. Now, what has happened 30, 40 years ago is that gradually social prestige became less and less connected with land ownership, as people from the hinterlands and the rural areas started moving to the cities. And the degree of social acceptance and social prestige then became more connected with how much money somebody is earning in the city, whether he is an IAS officer or whether he is a professor or something like that. It became connected with something else. But in the process, the representation in our parliament and legislatures continued to get tied with the size of the constituency, which was larger in some of those rural areas where there was the land and no people.
Mhm.
So no people living in a larger amount of land were getting overrepresented in our parliament, and that was the delimitation freeze. When Indira Gandhi put the freeze in 75 or 76, basically what she did was that she froze those constituencies so that it was no longer truly representative of the population, a situation that prevailed in Britain around 1830 and so on, when the size of the constituency was important and not the population of the constituency. Now, this is especially true today in the South.
Okay.
And therefore, the South is connected with this delimitation problem because they want the earlier the constituency limits to stay. Because in this way, a small number of people, politically influential but controlling the land in those sparsely occupied places, would have an inordinate political influence. And so, whereas larger numbers of people who are living in big cities were having lesser influence.
Okay.
So therefore, this caste jati delimitation becomes very excruciatingly a South Indian problem. And the so-called North-South divide
Uh-huh.
has been perpetuated because of this, because these southern constituencies are heavily overrepresented in today's parliament. And it flies again in the face of the fact that each person vote has the same value. Each person's vote today in India does not have the same value because of this reason, because of these large area South Indian constituencies with the small numbers of people living there. This problem is also there in the north, but it is especially bad in the south and even more so in Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
Which is why you find that in Tamil Nadu there is a greater call for retaining the old constituency limits of 1971, which don't bear any relationship to anything. So the connection between, and now in today's context, every day if you pick up the national newspapers, this anti-reservation thing has started.
Okay.
And this anti-reservation is also connected to this because certain groups of people who are again heavily represented in some of these constituencies, they are getting undue benefits and are being treated like vote banks, which is basically kind of a caste grouping, whether it is true of DMK in Tamil Nadu or the Samajwadi Party in UP. Other examples may also be given, the Marathas. So then you have groups of people who are now clubbed together through British notions of caste, enjoying a lot of land ownership and having a high proportional representation in the legislative places. And so what is happening is that the laws are being passed by people who are not representing the population of this country. And
Okay.
they are obviously in a special relationship with the political parties. It goes both ways. Once you encourage these castes, only people from those castes get into politics. And so you see vast number of people who are actually in big cities generating a lot of income for this country. Today, if we say our Indian economy is growing, it's aspirational, it is third or fourth or fifth in PPP terms and all that. This is coming largely due to the efforts of people in big cities who are actually not being represented in our legislative bodies. So you see, these three issues are all connected, and it has now become, Abhijit, an imbroglio.
Okay.
Because to quote Machiavelli, he said, no group of people in power will want to change something that is perpetuating their power.
Absolutely.
You try telling the politician today to do a proper delimitation, he will not agree. You tell him that if you remove reservations, the economy of this country may go up very suddenly and very rapidly because it will come to a merit-based system. He will not agree because the present system of constituency and voters and castes and all is perpetuating his position as a legislator or a parliamentarian.
Yes.
So why would anybody want to change something that's helping you so much? So the rest of it is kind of some sweet words and political slogans and things like that, but at the ground level, and this is where the anti-reservation thing has suddenly blown this whole thing into the open.
Okay.
Because don't forget, there is another aspect of anti-reservation, because it touches a matter, a subject, a word which so far has had no part to play in the political or constitutional life of this country, and this is a word called education.
Okay.
education word has never featured in our national discourse,
No.
for the simple reason that nothing to do with education had anything to do with a politician getting votes.
Yes.
And what has happened is that in our style of doing jugad, anybody who could make some career for himself, usually they migrated and went away abroad. Anybody who
Yes.
was well educated, they went abroad. And so they solved their problems at an individual level. Now, what has happened is because of the global geopolitical situation changing, especially in the USA, the
Yes.
door is being shut to Indians, typically from the upper classes of society, from making a life for themselves in the USA. So suddenly what has happened is people have realized that young person has realized that he or she has nowhere to go.
Hmm.
And that especially if you are from the upper caste or the upper class, then this state is not going to help.
Yes.
They have already thrown you under the bus. So they are young, they feel they are more intelligent or hardworking than others, and they feel that the state is not taking care of them. And this group of people who is now, let us say, between 20 to 25% of the population. 20 to 25% is a very large number in terms of
Yes.
the first past the post system of parliamentary elections that we follow. Somebody with 25% control of the votes can make a sizable difference in the result of the election. So, and there are two groups of people here who are angry, two groups of youngsters. One could be loosely called this people who adhere to this cockroach Janata Party,
Uh-huh.
because they say that they are not getting a good deal and they're not getting a job, basically. They're not getting a job. Then the other group is the people who are not covered by the reservations, namely the UC or general category students. And more significantly, there is a significant overlap between these two groups.
Yes.
One which is notionally called left wing and one which is notionally called right wing. I am using this word notionally in a very measured way. But what holds these two groups together is this matter of education. They feel that
Hmm.
in the matter of education, the Indian state has failed all of us miserably from 1947 onwards.
Yeah.
There is not one good thing that a young person will say today about the education system of our country, because in any normal, rational, sane country, and by this I'm implying that India is an insane country. Anybody who studies up to a certain level expects a job that is commensurate with the level of education that he or she has received. I
Yes.
don't think we are asking for something that is more than what we have studied for.
No.
But even
No.
that, the state is not able to provide, because they are going for some electoral things. And so then what happens is that some minute calculations, say Usmanabad, Kishanganj, or some Theni, or Jalgaon, Taran. Somehow a by-election in some of these obscure places assumes national level importance. So that entire laws, rules, regulations, everything is thrown away. So that some by-election in Kannauj doesn't go to some XYZ party. So our politicians have now become so myopic that these by-elections in these obscure places, I can go on mentioning this place, Samalakota, Bodinayakanur. See, these are all, they have assumed all India importance. Whereas, if you were to treat a place from where I'm speaking today, Bangalore, if you treat Bangalore properly, India can become a very advanced country. I'm not
Hmm.
saying that because I live in Bangalore. In fact, I'm standing in the campus of my institution, the Indian Institute of Science. So the picture, viewers should know, it's not a fake picture. I'm really standing there. And so imagine a forest-like situation like this in the heart of a big metropolis. People don't realize the potential of Bangalore. The fact that Bangalore can become like, some bigger version of Singapore or something if you treat it properly. But then if you start saying that no, 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 Bangalore is okay, but there is some place called Hiriyur, which is 10 miles from Bangalore, and Hiriyur is very important because one fellow is living there who is making reed baskets. So we have to give him a vote or some, so the talk diverted. And I'm really sorry to say this, but it seems that our politicians have lost the forest for the trees. They don't realize the big problems. I mentioned Bangalore because I'm partial to Bangalore, I live there, but same thing can be said about Chennai.
Mhm.
What about Calcutta? I mean, something that it's a city of enormous potential, window to our east, which has been ruined by about 50 years of bad governance. I mean, these are the places where if you take France or something, Paris is the place. If you take Britain, London is the place. New York, Shanghai, Tokyo, not Hiriyur and Bodinaikanur and Tarantaran. The future of India is not in Tarantaran. I think this is where our fellows have really they've lost the plot. And so matters that are this complicated, like reservations, varna, jati, caste, is so very complicated that unless somebody really has got their wits about them, they won't be able to solve all these problems so easily. And then added to that, they make a mistake and add on things that are unconnected, like women's reservation. I mean, imagine the connection of women's reservation with delimitation. All for some silly reason because they are now committed to women's reservation. And if they don't increase the number of seats in parliament, about one-fourth of the today's sitting MPs lose their seat because they're men. So a woman has to take that place as that women's reservation has been notified. So if they do nothing, one-fourth of today's MPs, all male, are going to lose their seats. They don't want to lose their seats. So okay,
Mhm.
chalo, we'll increase the number of seats. Forgetting in the meanwhile this proportional thing, you are only magnifying the problem. The north-south problem will get magnified by another 50%. I think my co-author can elaborate on this a little bit more to tell the viewers that what is being proposed by the Home Minister today in terms of delimitation is actually absurd. Absurd by any token or any kind of a argument except by the political class. Everybody in the political class will accept it because it suits them, in a very jolly manner. Why can't my
So what's being
co-author?
proposed?
Huh?
So what is being proposed? Deekhit, can you please explain?
Please explain.
Right. So before I answer that question, I want to illustrate this point sir has made about land, control of land and representation through hard numbers. So in our Lok Sabha, for example, uh, around 34 odd percent of this country lives in what we have defined as urban. And by we, I mean the state has defined as urban. The representation when it comes to MPs in the Lok Sabha from urban is almost half, 18%.
Okay.
Now let us take a look at Tamil Nadu. It is not that it's happening only at a national level. You pick any major state, and the same thing is happening. Let's take a look at Tamil Nadu because it's an extreme case. 54% of its population lives in urban areas, only 17% representation in their side. 1/7.
Okay.
Similarly, Maharashtra, which is also an industrial state, underrepresentation of urban areas. Gujarat, industrial state, underrepresentation of urban areas. Who does this benefit? It clearly benefits the people who control the land in these rural areas, which goes back to 1857 and the redistribution of land to certain castes to make them powerful and have conflicts in the society. We're still running on the same operating system as it were. More importantly, perhaps, so India started off in 47 as an agrarian country and we tried to industrialize ourselves. That did not pan out the way we intended. But in 1990, because of certain global circumstances and certain important people in India, like FC Kohli ji and so on, the IT revolution happened, the services revolution happened. Right? However, in the Lok Sabha as it stands today, if I analyze the declaration of MPs as to what their vocation is, and with vocation I mean business, trade, everything combined, the secondary and tertiary sectors of this country, which produce 80%, close to 80% of its GDP, only have 18% of representation in the Lok Sabha. So,
I
who
see.
does this Lok Sabha even represent? It does not represent us economically, it does not represent us socially, and it certainly does not represent us politically. Who is it representing? It's representing certain landed interests which correspond to certain what we would today call castes. And if I take the names of these castes and so on, these also correspond largely to the kind of caste which the Mandal Commission report rejected to be included in the backward castes. And today, these are the very castes, such as, let's say, the Yadavs or the Marathas, which are demanding more reservations. The Mandal Commission report explicitly, I have named these two because these two are named in the Commission report, had explicitly said that these are not backward castes on the basis of their social standing and their ability to network. However, these are castes which have a disproportionately higher share of land and have a higher share of representation both in their respective state assemblies and the country. So this is the context I wanted to give to the viewers so they understand the scale of what can only be called gerrymandering at a level which is so subtle and so indirect that we are not even able to understand. And this is the critical link between delimitation and reservations. That it takes me back to something that J.O. Root said, that if politics leads to the, if politics leads to, if politics leads to resources being allocated, all resources will only be allocated to politics. So
Yeah.
now we are in this situation. Now to come back to the question at hand, what is being proposed? What is being proposed is, you had a freeze on delimitation in 1971 by Indira Gandhi because she wanted to stem the rise of non-Congress governments which had embryonic presence in certain states in India. She wanted to stop that. One way to do that was to take the excuse that the south of the country should not be penalized for for controlling their birth rates. Now, the evidence is unambiguously clear across the world and including in India. The evidence says that national policy has almost no role to play on on the fertility rate. The predominant factor is simply your socio-economic development. South had a bit of a head start, firstly because they were coastal, secondly because of certain historical reasons where the British disproportionately invested in the coast to extract resources away from the hinterlands.
Yes.
On the back of that natural advantage, you had lower birth rates in the south. So it the World Bank propaganda at that time, which was this neo-Malthusian propaganda that the world's population has to be controlled. But what do they mean by the world? They only mean the third world. The third world's population has to be controlled. So that propaganda was co-opted by our politicians so that they can gerrymander our seats and continue running on the system for slightly longer. That 71 freeze, however, had to be extended by the coalition government of Vajpayee ji, which was more or less optionless at that point. And now what is happening is they want to reintroduce the same system, but not say that they're extending it by saying that whatever is the ratio of the seats allotted to every state, we will simply increase that by 50%. So the same imbalance which exists today, where let's say a voter in Kerala has 1.8 times the value of his vote compared to a voter in Rajasthan, and in certain constituencies, the imbalance goes up to 200 times plus. So this gravely unequal system that we've got in place today, they want to simply rebrand it, not say they're extending it because that will sound like a political concession, and carry
Just
on
to
with the
make
system that
just to make an aside, my vote, Mr. Desiraju's vote, is one of the most valueless votes in this country because I happen to live in a constituency that has more than 31 lakh people or 20 lakh eligible voters or something like that. My constituency, Bangalore North, is so large that the value of an individual vote is practically zero. So, I mean, this is not just fiction, or it is a reality. Somebody who lives in one of those funny places I mentioned, his vote is worth much more than mine. For the simple reason that there are not so many people living in his constituency.
Which is why it's important to realize, even for people in the South, that this is not a North South thing. Any South Indian person which lives in any major city, his vote is systematically being undercut by the same set of politicians that are causing the North South divide. And the North South divide is also a divide that is perpetuated by this imbalance, primarily because the allocation of money from the central pool, from the divisible pool. Just to explain, the divisible pool is basically the money which the center collects, not only for the money that is due to the center, but also some money that is collected on behalf of the states. So the center sometimes collects taxes, certain kinds of taxes that are due to be given to the states. So this forms a divisible pool, and the divisible pool is from where a lot of the money is allocated to the states as grants in aid and so on. That number of how much money has to be given to each state is actually tied to their representation. So systematically, what happens is there is a drain of wealth which is occurring from urban areas in this country and going to rich landed landowners who are predominantly in the rural areas of this country, and to simply tide over the friction, you're coming up with these freebies because otherwise there will be a social rupture. Who is the loser? The loser is neither a North Indian nor a South Indian. The loser is any productive Indian that is not a landowner. And by landowner, I mean a significant.
For example, all these largely schemes are direct consequence of this kind of thinking. A largely doesn't really benefit this country in any manner whatsoever. And the same largely money can be used much more productively, even to poor people living in villages, which will make a difference to them. It cannot be given in this blanket way to largelies. I think this is where more educated people have to call the bluff. Not allow politicians to get away. Earlier, Abhijit, they were saying Baba Saheb ka Samvidhan. Now that phrase has become somewhat less popular now. Now the latest thing is largely. I'm sorry I'm speaking like this, but it's come to this point now that I am unable to take these politicians very seriously because they seem to be in it only to, like what Machiavelli said, to extract more and more benefits for themselves.
So now that we understand the problems, what could be the solutions? How do we fix this issue? Who fixes this?
Now you are asking who is to bell the cat.
Yeah.
Because the only people who can address this issue is the legislative wing of government, not the judiciary. Only the legislative wing, not even the executive. And this kind of overlap between legislature and executive has become so blurry now.
Yes.
I myself in my Bharat book and elsewhere have asked for a complete separation of the legislative and executive wings, more like the American system. So who can do it and what can they do? I think the first thing that they should do is not to bring in this proposed delimitation thing, which people are speculating about so much. Abhijit, there is another category of people with whom I utterly disagree. They're also nationalistic. They want India to come up. They're not. I'm with them on that. They say that anybody, you, me, co-author, we have to keep voting for the BJP indefinitely and keep them in a majority because only they can solve the problems of this country, but they may take 300 years to solve these problems. So every day they will solve one small problem, and since we have 300 problems, it will take 300 years to solve these problems, but we should have enough faith in them and keep voting for them come what may. Because voting for the Congress will plunge this country into utter disaster. This is the argument that they make. The problem with this argument is that our problems are not static. Suppose the problems were static and remained as they are today, then there might be a case for this argument that keep voting for the BJP and they're going to take care of us. The fact is that with the slow action of the BJP, the problems are compounding. The problems are becoming different. We didn't have this anti reservation problem 2 months ago. Well, it was there, it was brewing, but it didn't go on the streets. And now people have realized that when you go on the streets, then the state will listen to you. Yesterday, some birthday of prophet or something, I think a lot of things, street protests were held. Now, why should they? I mean, it's a nice day for Muslims. They're celebrating the birthday of the prophet. Why should they take to the streets and start beating up people? So, I mean, this business of going to the streets, people go to the streets when the state is weak. If people have confidence in the state, nobody will take to the streets. So, I mean, once again, this is indication of the very uncertain times we are living. Coming back to your question, the first thing they should do or they should not do, they should not bring in this delimitation as they have thought about it. And all this business, the women's reservation is there. As the Congress party has argued, conduct the 2029 election with the women's reservation. And the 1/4 of the MPs who lose their seats, let them lose their seats. This country doesn't exist for those 543 members of the Lok Sabha. They exist for us, we don't exist for them. The first thing to realize is that this is a very difficult problem to solve. Conduct the 2029 election as it stands today. Don't try to increase the number of seats this way, that way. And sit down and start talking about the issues that me and my co-author have said, that urban India, which is generating a lot of the wealth, is seriously underrepresented. Otherwise, be a bit bolder and say that we're not going to have anything for some time, some sort of a semi-authoritarian rule. But I am again not very much in favor of that, because if we go that route, then what is to prevent us from becoming another Pakistan or something? It's the emergency we already saw 50 years ago. It was not a very happy experience for us. And basically, any kind of authoritarian rule, it goes against the basic principles of Sanatana. Very basic principles it goes against. So I think all these people who naively suggest military rule and authoritarian rule, strong dictator, etc., it doesn't go with the ethos of our country. Because we are not very comfortable with that kind of rule, never have been. So we should only do things as what we are. I think the immediate thing is not to bring in this delimitation bill. I very much fear they're going to bring it in, although how on earth they're going to get the 2/3 majority, special majority, is still beyond me, because there is a lot of division. Today, Mr. Kharge, the president of the Congress party, has said that unless there is a serious discussion on this delimitation all-party meeting, he is urging the government not to bring in this. And anyway, 2/3 majority at today's moment seems a little difficult. But I think that would be a good first step. Discretion is the better part of valor. Just keep quiet for some time. You don't have to say something or do something every day. Governance is not like that. Governance is to do with a relatively peaceful thing without these sorts of discussions on a daily basis. I mean, I don't know what my co-author says. Suppose I had to do something. What is the cure for a problem that is like a hydra with multi heads? I think the first step is not to do so much, and to allow a cooling off period in this, what has now become a highly divided country. The matter of reservations is not going to go away, because all our youngsters are trapped in this country. They cannot go to America anymore. And they realize it, because they're taking ruinous loans in having to go to America, and they're not able to repay those loans. They're not getting jobs, and they're committing suicide. So they know that this is not a route. So once the young people of the country are trapped within their own country, they are trapped. Then the government is sitting on a volcano. Because and then what will happen is something that I personally don't want to see happen. That is large scale violence on the streets where nobody is really very safe. That is something that our enemies like China and all would love to see, and we should not oblige them on this matter. And this is where I feel that the today's government, using this word again, which seems to have no role to play, they have a certain moral obligation to the people who have voted them into power. They have a moral obligation to us because we voted them in for a better country. In 2014, we went for a radically different kind of political party. We were hoping for a better country. And this better country is something that we would like to see within our reasonable lifetimes, not 200 years from now. Because in 200 years from now, as what Lenin said, we are all dead. And I'm not really concerned about what happens in this country after I'm dead. So I think somewhere they have lost. So answering your question, what do you do? I think for the time being, conduct the 2029 election like you conducted the 2024 election with 543 seats. And since now the women's reservation is definitely there, get those one third or one fourth, whatever women you want. And the present fellows who are there, who are all men, have to give up their seats. That's it. This country doesn't exist for that one fourth of Lok Sabha members, or they must be members of parliament for the rest of their lives. No, there's no rule like that.
Okay, Deekhit, any words about this?
Just my closing comments. I think the first thing that all of us need to be honest and transparent. For far too long, we've been trying to find workarounds to small problems and inventing bigger problems unnecessarily. Politicians and people of this country alike. Firstly, we have to be transparent and honest that we need a system that is pragmatic and works rather than a system that is trying to accommodate 1,000 different people with 1,000 different voices. Rule by consensus is simply anarchy after a certain scale. It is not possible, and certainly not possible if you want to accommodate interests such as the landed politicians we spoke about that have an intrinsic interest in keeping this.
I think we have lost Deekhit.
Connection is gone. So I think I will continue to say what he said.
Yes.
Is that there must be a feeling among the politicians that we cannot go any further doing the kinds of things we've been doing. It has reached a dead end. Now we have come up against a stone wall. And if we try to do anything in trying to pretend that these problems don't exist, then we will invite a holocaust that will dissolve all of us. I think that is really what is. It has now come to that tipping point, and the politicians have to be aware. I suspect some of them are aware because I don't think they are unintelligent men or women. I think they know the problems. They're too scared to think about what might happen to them in the future, which is why I think they have become sort of terrified, and then they don't want to do anything, simply in the fear as to what might happen, the fear of the unknown. I think that is what has gripped them. And we shall have to see. I think we will get some early political indications as to what happens in the assembly election in UP. I think that will be a good barometer.
Okay.
Because if the anti-reservation people do have sufficient heft, which I think they do in Uttar Pradesh, I think the election results of Uttar Pradesh of next year will be very different from what is being proposed in magazines and newspapers today. They're still pretending it's the old Uttar Pradesh. But as I said, anybody who can control 15 to 25% of the votes will become a significant player in any election outcome. So I think we will get an indication of that. And even if at that stage the political class, namely the ruling party, is not willing to course correct, then I will predict that they will surely lose the election in 2029. There's no way in which they can come out of the 2029 election unscathed, no matter what the Congress or the deep state or anybody does. Independent of all that, they will probably lose the election because it's now reached that tipping point out of which you can't really come out. I think my co-author is back.
All right, Deekhit, last word to you, please.
Fine, last word.
My apologies, I lost my connection. Again, pragmatism, honesty, transparency, these are the minimum that we deserve in terms of the political structure that we've got. The entire mess that we've got vis-a-vis education, vis-a-vis representation, vis-a-vis deep social divisions that we have, they will all lead to not just a suboptimal outcome, but an outcome where we are permanently locked in a confrontation with other Indians, in a confrontation with other so-called castes that have been formed due to British and then the machinations of the politicians that inherited the British system, rather than a cohesive system where the meritorious is rewarded, the productive is rewarded, and people who perhaps need some kind of assistance from the state to go on get reasonable and effective assistance. The idea behind the original scheme of reservations of 10 years was precisely this, that within those 10 years, we will deliver certain public goods and certain modicum of social and political representation to bring them effectively within the fold so that they can, so that the entire class, as it were, is able to participate equally as citizens. That is not happening simply because we've turned it into a confrontational system that is diverting away from the real issues. The real issue was never north and south. It was about urban areas, productivity, and the control of the landed classes of this country on the politics of this country. None of us want a suboptimal outcome. None of us want an outcome that will lead to permanent confrontations between Indians and antagonism. And for that, we need to be honest. We need to say that reservations as they stand have not worked. The scheme of political representation that we have, delimitation, has not worked. And any extensions by any name whatsoever, any form whatsoever, whether you call it an extension or not, will also not work.
Thank you so much for this very important discussion. The problem we are facing is that our politicians have been implementing permanent solutions to temporary problems, and these create permanent problems. So that's where we are today. I hope that this is resolved, that our politicians find wisdom in themselves to address the real issues we are facing in a much better way. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was really a really important discussion, a really enlightening one. Thank you so much.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Indeed, Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Thank you.